So with the Villa Once Beloved, I created Villa Sepulveda out of whole cloth. It's kind of a mishmash of different places that I've visited or that I've had the opportunity to stay in for a few nights while I was still growing up in the Philippines. Villa Sepulveda is one of those ancestral homes that have been around since the Spanish colonial period. I think in the book I say that it was built in the 1840s, 1850s, and I've been to a bunch of those houses. I've seen them, and I was always kind of transported into a different time, that's partly because of my conditioning, my education, and my culture. But I've always thought I want to create my own version of this, my own house. Um, and so I did that with Villa Sepulveda, and I set it in the province where my mother is from. She's from Leyte and Samar in the middle of the Philippines. And, we didn't have an ancestral home. Well, my family did not come from that background, but we've seen them. I've seen them. We have like distant relations and family friends who have those houses. And I was like, okay, now if we had one of these, what would it look like? If we had one of these in Leyte, in kind of like the hometown where my mom grew up, what would it look like? And so that's how kind of the architecture came about for me. And then, as I was creating the story, the setting is very, very important in any Gothic piece, but it has to echo into other parts of the book. It's not just the setting, it has to thematically tie in. It has to say something about your story, about your characters. So that's where, again, the kind of mix between old and new, the ruin and decay, and the kind of constant restoration flows in because I view our country's background, our country's history as a little bit of that as well. So I wanted those kind of motifs and themes to seep in through the architecture and emphasize and kind of resonate with the emotional themes of the story. Our main character is Sophie. She's a Filipino American transracial adoptee, and she was, as a baby, adopted by white parents in Nebraska. She has barely any connection to the Philippines aside from her genetics, basically. And she's never been to the Philippines. So the story kind of opens with her visiting the Philippines with Adrian, who is her college boyfriend. Adrian is from the Sepulveda clan. They are a politically powerful clan in the Philippines, not based on any actual families. And they are also very rich. And Adrian is Filipino American. He was born in the US because his family moved to the US. Um, After the fall of the Marcos dictatorship in the 80s, the Sepulvedas moved to the US. So Adrian grew up in the Bay Area, but he is very interested in his family history and his country's history. And he is a filmmaker or a film student, and he wants to make a documentary about, both the good things and bad about the country. He has, at least in the beginning of the story, we kind of get the sense that he has a clear eye about what is wrong with not only the country's history or not only the Marcos dictatorship, but also his family's kind of complicity during that period of time. So what happens is Adrian's grandfather, who is governor during the Marcos dictatorship, dies, and he was living in the Philippines. So the entire family, the entire Sepulveda family has to go back to the Philippines. And Adrian says, well, this is a good opportunity for you, Sophie, to go to the Philippines and see the country and also to meet my family. Probably not the best idea to introduce your girlfriend to the family during a funeral, but circumstances were what they were. So that's how the story opens. With Adrian and Sophie, I wanted to show kind of how different kinds of Filipinos with different experiences would approach their history and their country. We have one who is a Filipino American who has basically no idea about the Philippines, hasn't been raised into that culture, and doesn't uh, probably not formally or informally educated about the Philippines. And we have one who is very closely connected to it, and show just how they approach the events of the book in differing ways. There are other point of view characters in the book, such as Javier or Remedios, who are approaching it from different experiences. We have one who was born in the Philippines and moved to the Bay Area as a child. We have one who is just a Filipino character who was born and raised there and never left the country. So I think it was important for me to have all of these characters represent maybe a point of view of like, okay, if I am a Filipino who's never left this little hometown that I grew up in, how am I viewing the Marcos dictatorship? Because that's going to differ from someone who, grew up probably wealthy and then moved to the States. And that's going to differ for someone who totally grew up in the US and has no connection to the Philippines. With horror, and especially with Gothic horror, there's always this kind of ambiguity about what the horror is. I think at this point, it's so predominant in culture enough that we know that Gothic horror, it's about humans being monsters as much as monsters, supernatural monsters, right? I mean, we see that in very many stories, including Frankenstein, which just came out from Guillermo del Toro, right? Um, I think for me, the challenge was whether or not to, and how to strike the balance about that ambiguity, whether or not the monsters, the supernatural monsters, are going to be real or not. How real are they going to be? Are they a figment of one's imagination, which is also a very common convention in Gothic stories, right? You have the unreliable narrator, or you have, unfortunately, in like older classics, you have, the hysterical woman who is like losing her mind. So there is always a question for the reader, well, is what's happening real or not? And striking that balance is always difficult because you don't want to be too ambiguous that the reader gets frustrated. And also, you don't want to be too explicit that the reader feels being preached to, or like just taking away the reader's sense of discovery and meaning making. So that was one of the challenges that I had to really tinker with and calibrate. And I did that by, going back to the classics, modern classics and classics, and see how they did things. How did Jane Eyre approach it? How did Rebecca approach it? How did Frankenstein approach it? But yeah, that was definitely a thing that even to this day, when I'm talking about the book to folks like you, I have to calibrate the reader's expectations on what they're going to read, or the ambiguity and the reality and the way, the supernatural and the religious and the factual and the historical all intersect. I kind of have to calibrate how I describe it and how I kind of emphasize certain things and de-emphasize certain things.